this lesson, I want to focus on what is immediately apparent as soon as you start reading Ecclesiastes, and that is Solomon's quest. Solomon's quest. When you open your Bible to Ecclesiastes, you see that he's like a scientist. He's observing things. He's noticing the cycles of nature. Verse 6 of chapter 1, the wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. But we see that his observation of nature is just an illustration of what he sees to be an observation about all of life and about the human heart, and that is that everything is pointless. It's all vanity. He concludes this near the end of chapter 1 when he says in verse 14, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. So the scope of Solomon's quest, what he's searching for, is life under the sun. That's really important to keep in mind, that he's looking at everything that is observable and explorable from a human perspective, life under the sun, and he concludes that all is vanity. Now, what we want to find out is, what was Solomon looking for? What was he after? Why was he on this search? What was he hoping to gain from this search? As we see that he doesn't spare any detail. We looked at verse 13 of chapter 1, also in chapter 8, verse 16, he says, I looked at everything. I turned over every rock. I looked in every nook and cranny. But what is it that he was looking for? Now, that's not immediately apparent. He doesn't give away the object of his quest immediately. So I want us to look at some of these verses here. Verse 1 of chapter 2. Go in there in your Bible, please. Chapter 2 and verse 1. Solomon says, I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. So he's testing his heart with something. He's trying to find out something by testing his heart. Okay, what is he trying to prove? Well, when you look at verse 3 in your Bibles. I sought in my heart, there's again language of searching, of this quest, of this aim of discovery, to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly. And here is the clearest expression of what Solomon was going after. Here's the object of his quest, of his search. Till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. Okay, so what was Solomon looking for? What was he trying to discover? Well, he was trying to discover what people should do with their lives. What should I do? Okay, so I have a life to live. How should I live it? What's the point of all this? What should I occupy myself with? What should I spend my time and my money on? So, and what you can put in the blanks there, the best human activity. What should people do with their lives? That's what Solomon is looking for. We see this not only in chapter 2 and verse 1 and verse 3. Verses 3 is where he states it most explicitly, most clearly. I'm trying to find out what people should spend their lives doing. He says it right there in verse 3. But then when you get to the very end of the book, he says, in the words you all know, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole what? This is the whole duty of man. So this is what people should be doing. Now, what I want to, as we go through this process, I want to tell you something. Pretend like we're going through this as if you're watching a movie for the second time or reading a book for the second time, like a very intense novel or something. You know how it's going to end, or when you're watching the movie, you know everyone's going to be okay at the end, but you still cry at the sad parts, right? And you still get scared at the scary parts. So yes, we know that Solomon in the end is going to say, here's the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, for God's going to bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or evil. We know that's the end, but we want to put ourselves in his shoes and temporarily suspend that we know that, so that we can still cry at the sad parts, laugh at the funny parts, and get scared at the scary parts as we go through the book of Ecclesiastes. So he's on this journey, he's on this search, and what is he looking for? He's trying to figure out, what should people do with their lives? What's the best thing that people could spend their time doing? How does Solomon try to figure that out? Well, he does it by testing things. Well, I'm going to go I'm going to be absolutely frivolous, like crazy. I'm just going to laugh a lot. I'm just going to be the life of the party. I'm going to drink. I'm going to give myself to wine. I'm going to enjoy music. You know this catalog of all these things that Solomon went through. He built great works. What is Solomon after? He's trying to figure out, what should I do with my life, and what should people do with their lives? That is one aspect of Solomon's quest. So, the best human activity, what should people do with their lives? But there's something else that Solomon's looking for. And we see this hinted at verse 10 of chapter 1. So turn back there in your Bible. I already looked at this verse. I already mentioned this verse earlier. Solomon says, "Is there anything whereof it may be said, see, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us." Now, this is Solomon's aim to find out. I want to discover real progress. I see cycles in nature. The insanity of the cyclical movements of the sea and the wind and the weather cycles and all this goes. Now, is there anything that actually goes somewhere? It'd be kind of like if you were lost in the woods and you discover that you've just been making circles. You want to see something new. You want to see a pathway that you haven't encountered before. If you're going around and around, you're like, I saw that rock, and that's the 4th time I've passed that rock. I saw that tree, and we've passed it like 7 times already. I just want to see something I haven't seen before to know that this trail is actually going somewhere, or I'm going to go crazy. And Solomon's saying, is there actually progress to life? Is this really going anywhere? Is there something that will be, is this going toward a satisfying conclusion that I could actually know about? So that's in chapter 1 and verse 10. Look also at chapter 7. So turn to chapter 7 and verse 25. We're trying to figure out, what is Solomon looking for? What's the object of his quest? Well, one of the things that he's looking for, one of the aims of his quest, is what people should do with their lives. But there's this other, and I think it's a deeper and larger aim that Solomon is looking at. Chapter 7 and verse 25. I applied mine heart to know and to search and to seek out wisdom. And here it is. And the reason of things. I want to see a comprehensive framework of experience that makes sense of everything. Like the reason of everything. And I'm going to look in madness, I'm going to look in folly, I'm going to look in good relationships and bad relationships. I'm going to look everywhere to try to find the reason for things, the scheme of all things. And to do so, Solomon stares long and hard at the scenarios that tend to frustrate and perplex us. In chapter 4 and verse 1, he looks at the situation where people are oppressed with no one to comfort them. You think of slavery, and there's no one to redeem, no one to deliver people. And Solomon looks at this situation. He's like, what's the reason for that? Or he goes on and says in chapter 4, verses 7 through 8, a person exhausts himself working, and he never finds any satisfaction from his work. So someone spends his whole life working long hours and hardly sleeping at all and just barely making a living, and he dies. And Solomon's like, no, what was the point of that? He looks at a person in chapter 6 and verses 1 and 2 who acquires wealth and possessions and honor. And while this person accumulates all this stuff and all this reputation, yet the person is so consumed with his work that he doesn't even enjoy it. And then he dies, and it gets passed on to someone else. And again, Solomon says, what was the point of that? He looks at another scenario. This is in chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. He gives this little story about a wise youth who comes to power, and he might actually be referring to Joseph, who came from prison to Potiphar's house and then became eventually second to command in Egypt. He came to power. He let many people. And then he says subsequent generations forgot about him. And he did so many great things. And Solomon looks at it and says, now what was the point of that? He looks at a rich man who lost everything in a bad investment. This guy was very successful, and he put all his eggs in one basket, and this was going to be the big investment that was going to really catapult him to riches. And yet it was a bad investment. And that investment reduced him to utter poverty, and he died like that. And Solomon says, so what was the point of that? Finally, he looks at people who do what's right their whole life. Like, people try to do everything just right, and yet in doing the right thing, someone perishes. And then he compares it with people who are just living wickedly, and in their wickedness, they prolong their lives. Like, their wickedness actually helps them to prosper. And Solomon looks at it and says, now, what was the point of that? So, he's thinking, now, maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Maybe there's something under the sun that's going to make sense. If I look at it from this angle, I can see, oh, now I understand why this man suffered and just died and wasn't able to enjoy what he... Or you look at this situation where the people are doing what's right and they're oppressed, and people are doing what's wrong and they thrive, and you think, maybe I'm looking at the wrong angle. So you shift your perspective and you look at it and you be like, oh, I get it. Is there anything like that? Is there any perspective that you could look at life from in which all the inconsistencies, the unfairness will come together and you'll see, that makes complete sense now? Solomon was looking for an explanation. This is the blank by number 2 under the aims of Solomon's quest, that the second aim, an explanation for everything in life. What will make sense of every detail of our earthbound experience? That's in the blanks in your handout. An explanation for everything in life. What will make sense of every detail of our earthbound experience? And we assume if I can get this perspective that will make sense of every experience, the injustices, the unfairness, the pleasure, the unsatisfying longings, if I could just look at things right, then I'll figure it out, and then I could figure out what to do with my life. So you see how these aims are so intertwined with each other? If I could figure out a perspective that will make sense of everything, then I'll understand what I should spend my life doing. It's kind of like, that's why this picture of someone working on a puzzle. If I can see the picture on the puzzle box, then I'll know where to put the pieces. That's what Solomon's trying to do. If I can figure out the scheme of things, the perspective from which unfairness and injustice will all make sense. If I could figure out the scheme of things, then I'll know, here, I'm going to put this piece in my life together, and this piece of my life together, and this piece of my life together. Then I'll know what that good thing, then I'll know the whole duty of man. If I could figure out what the picture is on the puzzle box. Okay, so those are Solomon's 2 aims. First of all, what should people do with their lives? What's the best thing to do? What's the point of existence? And finally, what's an explanation for life? What will make sense of every detail of our earthbound experience? Now, let's discover what were the results of Solomon's quest. Was Solomon successful? Did he find out the answers? And here is where we have a real surprise. Here's where the surprise comes. We'll look first of all at the second quest that we looked at, the explanation for everything in life. Was Solomon successful in that? Well, let's go to chapter 8 and verses 16 and 17. Did Solomon figure out a perspective from which to stand and say, now it all makes sense, I get it? Well, look at this. Chapter 8, verse 16. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done upon the earth, for also there is that neither day nor night seeth sleep with his eyes, then I beheld all the work of God, and what did he conclude? That a man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun, because though a man labor to seek it out, yet he shall not find it. Yea, further, though a wise man think to know it, yet shall he not be able to find it. That's not the only place Solomon stated the failure of his quest. If you'll look at chapter 7 and verse 24, so flip back maybe a page in your Bible, chapter 7, verse 24, he says, that which is far off, the object of his quest, he's trying to move toward it, and exceeding deep, who can find it out? It's a rhetorical question. It expects the answer. Nobody. He can't find out. He can't find this perspective from which to stand and say, all of life makes sense now. If you'll look at chapter 7 and verse 14. Is that the one I just had? Let's go to 5:2. 5:2. Be not rash with thy mouth, and let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. What are the sort of things we tend to utter hastily before God? God, why did you do this? Why did this happen to me? No, don't be so rash to say that, because God is in heaven and you are on earth, and you don't know everything there is to know. Did Solomon figure everything out? Was that first aim successful? No, it was an unexpected failure. That's what goes in the blank there. That explanation for everything in life was an unexpected failure. Now, here's what we might guess would happen. If you think, I can't figure life out, there are things in life that don't make sense, that make it seem like life is absurd or pointless, utterly incomprehensible. What do our reactions tend to be? Well, first of all, look at why did Solomon fail? Why did this quest fail? First of all, it failed because we cannot grasp everything God has done. This key verse in Ecclesiastes is chapter 3 and verse 11. So turn there, please. Ecclesiastes 3:11. He hath made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he hath set the world in their heart, so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. That word world there could be translated eternity. God has put this longing for eternity. We could say even a longing to see what is eternal in our hearts. We long to make sense of it all, and yet what's the but? What's the conjunction? Yet we can't. We can't understand the very beginning of things and the very end of things. We just have this narrow scope that we can see through. We can't grasp everything God has done. We don't know the future. This is a pretty prominent theme. It comes up several times throughout Ecclesiastes. In chapter 3, you're in chapter 3 and verse 11. Go down and look at verse 22. Wherefore I perceive, I'm just going to skip to the end of the verse here. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? How do you know what's going to come after you die? You can't. You don't know the future. We see this in chapter 6 and verse 12. It says this, For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? For what, the end of the verse says, for who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? That's 6:12. In chapter 11 and verse 12, we see the same theme advance, that we cannot know the future. Verse 2, give a portion to 7 and also to 8. He's saying you should diversify your investments. For thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. You don't know the future. And finally, in verse 6, it says this, In the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand, for thou knowest not whether thou shalt prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. And finally, we don't have God's perspective, and that's the verse that I looked at earlier, chapter 5, verse 2. God's in heaven, and you're on earth. And you can't know the future, and you don't have God's perspective, and you can't grasp everything God has done. And that's why Solomon says, no matter how hard you search, no matter how wise you think you are, he says this, even if a wise man spends his whole life looking for this, you're never going to come to a place where you think, I understand, I get it, it all makes sense to me. No inconsistencies, no unfairness here. No, it makes perfect sense. Solomon says, you'll never get there because your perspective is earthbound, life under the sun. And that is a failure. Now, how do we tend to respond to that failure? Well, go back to chapter 2. And as you turn there, let me bring up the puzzle illustration again. Let's say that you walk into someone's living room, and on the coffee table is this huge jigsaw puzzle. And you're intrigued by it, and so you sit down, you begin fingering the pieces, and you've been trying to put them together. And some of them you're able to fit a little bit together, and then you find a piece that it doesn't seem like it fits at all. In fact, as you look at it, you think, I wonder if this even belongs to the same puzzle set because it looks so different. And you try to put that together and it doesn't work. You're able to put a few things together and then you've put a little bit more together here, but those don't seem to fit together at all. And so someone else comes in and starts working on the puzzle, and without looking up at you, that person says, "Oh, by the way, you do know that there's no picture to look at to guide you on this puzzle." Like, what? Yeah, there's no way to see what the puzzle's supposed to look like. Now, what would you do? Well, if you're a real creative sort of person, you'd be like, "Oh, no problem. I'm just going to make my own picture then. I'm just going to put it together the way I think it should be." And as you look up, you realize that there are other people at this coffee table, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're just cramming pieces together, and yet they're constantly finding pieces that don't fit into that puzzle. Or, what else would you do? "I hate this puzzle. This is a dumb puzzle." And you can keep on working at it, and you'd be like, "Okay, nothing else to do. I'm in this room and sitting at this coffee table. I know there's nothing else to do, but here I go, working at this puzzle, but I hate it because there's no picture." Or you could be like, "I give up." You turn to chapter 2, and this is what Solomon initially concludes about life. Look at verse 15 and 16. "Then I said in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. I can't make sense of things, so what's the point? It doesn't matter what I do, wise or foolish." I mean, so people give their lives to working out and getting all fit and chiseled and buff and whatever. Well, you're going to die anyway, so what's the point? All right. Okay, so you're getting all smart by getting a degree and studying and reading books. Well, what's the point of that? You're just going to die anyway. Or you're trying to build your career and make a lot of money and have influence and power and look all important at meetings. And what's the point? It doesn't matter what you do. You can be a complete fool and live however you want. You can be a pleasure seeker, but it doesn't matter because no one knows what the point of this is. So just fit it however you want. Or you can just say, "I hate life." Look at verse 17. He says this, "Therefore I hated life because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity." That's the pointlessness and vexation of spirit. And then he hated his work. He despaired. He said, "I give up. I hated my labor." Okay, those are normal responses to this failure. It doesn't matter what I do. I hate life. I give up. Now, here's where the book of Ecclesiastes takes a very surprising twist. Because, like I said last time, we read Ecclesiastes with the end conclusion in mind. We realize that Solomon is constantly working toward that conclusion. This is the conclusion of the matter. After all's been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Whatever Solomon is saying near the beginning here, he's working toward that conclusion. All of this material is meant to steer you toward that one conclusion that he's going to end the book with. So, and here's where the surprise comes. He doesn't stop there. If you read on in chapter 2, he says this in verse 24. "There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God." Okay, so we have here the results of Solomon's quest, his explanation for everything. That was unexpected failure, but he didn't fail in that second part of his quest. Remember, we said at the beginning, Solomon is looking for what should people spend their lives doing? What should people do with their lives? What's the best thing people can do? And Solomon actually gives it here. The first part of the quest was a failure. He said, "I can't figure everything out, but I do know what I should spend my life doing." Now, that goes contrary to reason, because we would think, if I can't figure everything out, then what? It doesn't matter, or I hate life, or I give up. And yet Solomon says, no. Here's what you need to do. You need to Eat and drink and enjoy it. Make your soul enjoy good in your labor. Work hard and enjoy your work. And this, it says, is from the hand of God. For God giveth to a man, verse 26 of chapter 2, that which is good in his sight, wisdom and knowledge and joy. God's given these things to us. But to the sinner he hath given travail to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. Now, we looked at this last time, that there is this recurring theme that we should enjoy life. You're in chapter 2, turn to chapter 3, verses 12 and through 14. It's almost repeated verbatim, and we have these common elements. Chapter 3, verses 12 through 14. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor, it is the gift of God. All right, let's skip over to chapter 8 and verse 15. Same thing here. Then I commended mirth. This was initially, Solomon says, was pointless and vanity, because a man hath no better than under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be merry, for that shall abide with him of his labor the days of his life, which God giveth him under the sun. Let's go, you're in chapter 8, go to chapter 9, verses 7 through 10. Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, drink thy wine with a merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. Let thy garments be also always white, and let thy head lack no ointment. Live joyfully with the wife of whom thou lovest all the days of the life of thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun, all the days of thy vanity, for that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. And finally, look at we'll look at chapter 3, verse 22. He says this. Again, he's asking the question, what should people spend their lives doing? Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion, for who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? So what is Solomon saying people should do with their lives? What is it? What should we do? We should enjoy our lives. Why can we enjoy our lives? Why can he specifically, in 5 of those passages, they have common themes. One thing that all 5 passages say is food, eat and drink. Enjoy it. Another thing that each of those 5 passages talk about is your work. There's something satisfying about a job well done. Enjoy it. They talk about relationships. Enjoy them. Now, how does that square with what Solomon is saying to fear God and keep his commandments? Because we see that the conclusion of the whole matter is that we should fear God. Well, let's try to make some sense of this. The best human activity, there's a surprising success that he found that, to enjoy life and fear God. Well, here's where it is. The end of the conclusion, the end of the matter is this: fear God. And fearing God involves recognizing that God is the giver of everything. That God has put you on this earth for a purpose. And that God is going to hold you accountable for the things that he's given you. God is the giver. That's another thing that all 5 of those passages, the ones that are in parentheses before the also, 2:24, 3:12, 8:15, 9:7, and then we'd add 3:22. That's what they have in common is this: it's a gift of God. And part of fearing God means to recognize everything you have as from his hand. God is the giver of hardship. He's the giver of happiness. And part of fearing God means enjoying what God has given you as he intended you to enjoy it. Now, I want us to bring this again to that puzzle illustration. Because we are sitting in front of this coffee table, and the pieces are scattered before us, and we see some pieces that seem to fit and some pieces that don't seem to fit. And yet we have, and this is analogous to our life, God has given us some pieces of our life that seem to make sense and some that don't seem to fit at all. Some pieces are dark and frightening, and some pieces are joyful. And we're sitting there and we're trying to piece them together, and yet there is someone saying, I will tell you what to do with the pieces. And we want to say, God, will you please show me the picture on the box? Will you please show me the perspective from which I can see, I get it now. I understand why these dark pieces are here in my life. I understand what these lighter pieces have to do with. And God says, you can't see that. I'm in heaven. You're on earth. Here's what you need to do. You need to recognize that I'm the one I've given you each piece of your puzzle. And you fear me, and you keep my commandments. You put those pieces just where I tell you to put them. That's what you're supposed to do. Enjoy the pieces that I give you that give joy and pleasure, like food and work and relationships. And then a day of adversity, Solomon says, consider, for God has made the one as well as the other. And that is the object of Solomon's quest. He's what's the whole perspective on things? What's the perspective that will make sense of every detail of my life? Solomon concludes you can't find it. Does that mean that it doesn't matter what I do? Does it mean I should despair or give up? Nope. Here's what you need to do. You need to recognize that God is a giver of everything that you have, and fear him and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man.